The last light of day bled across the horizon when they took her. The sky was painted in streaks of red and gold, but there was no beauty in it for her only terror. Rough hands dragged her from the edge of her village, the smell of smoke and dust clinging to the night air. She struggled, kicking, clawing, but her captors only laughed. To them, she was nothing more than property to be sold. When the sun rose, they bound her wrists with coarse rope and shoved her onto the back of a wagon. Her bare feet scraped against the splintered wood, her heartbeat hammering as the reality sank in. She was no longer free. Around her, other frightened souls sat silently, their eyes hollow, their bodies too exhausted to resist. The men leading them spoke in harsh tones, boasting about how much she would fetch. Pretty one like her. At dawn she'd bring a fine price, one sneered. Each word felt like a dagger, stripping her humanity away piece by piece. As the wagon rattled into the gathering dark, fear wrapped around her chest like iron bands. She stared at the horizon, the fading sun blurring behind. Tears. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of defiance still lived, but it was buried under the crushing weight of helplessness. When the campfires were lit that night, she curled against the wagon rail, whispering silent prayers. She begged not for riches or freedom, but simply for survival, for someone, anyone, to hear her cry before the sun rose and sealed her fate. Dawn was coming, and with it, the auction. The camp was alive with cruel laughter, the traders drinking hard around the fire. Their voices carried in the still night, each word reminding her that she was nothing more than a prize waiting to be sold. The crackle of flames threw long, jagged shadows across the ground, making the men look more like predators than men. She was shoved into a rough pen made of wood and rope, corralled with 3 others. The stench of fear hung heavy in the air, mixed with the sharp tang of smoke. One woman kept her face buried in her knees, rocking silently, while a boy no older than 12 stared blankly into the dirt, his spirit already broken. She pressed, her back against the wooden rail, her body trembling from exhaustion. The rope still dug into her wrists, chafing the skin raw. She tried to stay still, but every sound, the clink of bottles, the mutter of bargaining, the scraping of boots echoed like thunder in her ears. Above her, the stars shone cold and distant, indifferent to her suffering. She wondered if anyone, anywhere, was looking up at the same sky and thinking of her. The thought made her throat ache. As the night dragged on, the men began boasting about the morning. The girl goes first, one slurred, pointing toward her with a grin that made her stomach turn. Fetch a good price, maybe even start a bidding war. Their laughter rang in her ears long after they turned back to their whiskey, curling. Into herself, she whispered into the darkness, barely moving her lips. Please, God, don't let them sell me. Send someone, anyone. But the only answer was the crackling fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Sleep never came. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw herself standing on a crude platform at sunrise, hands bound, strangers circling like vultures. The thought made her chest tighten until she could barely breathe. Around her, the camp settled into uneasy silence. A few guards dozed near the fire, rifles across their laps, while others slumped against barrels. The drunken snores filled the night, but for her, every sound was sharp, every flicker of flame, every shifting shadow. She leaned close to the boy sitting beside her, his wrists bound like hers. Do you know where they'll take us? She whispered, her voice breaking. His eyes, dull and defeated, flicked toward her. Does it matter? He murmured. They'll sell us, that's all. His hopelessness chilled her more than the night air. She bit her lip to stop the sob rising in her throat. No, she told herself. I can't give up. I won't, with trembling fingers. She tugged at the knot around her wrists, wincing as the rope burned deeper into her skin. She whispered prayers between sharp breaths, willing herself not to cry out. At last, she stilled, realizing the futility. The ropes were too tight. Escape, impossible. Her heart pounded louder with each passing hour. In the silence, she made a desperate vow. If anyone comes, she whispered to the stars, I'll beg, I'll plead, I'll be anything they need, just so I don't belong to these men. Her words, soft as a breath, disappeared into the night. Yet something inside her shifted, an ember of determination flared in the ashes of her fear. Morning was not far away. She could feel it pressing on her like a weight. Dawn would decide her fate. The first faint glow of dawn painted the horizon, a pale band of silver against the black sky. The girl's stomach twisted as the camp stirred awake. Men groaned and cursed, taking out embers in the fire, shaking off the night's drunken haze. With every crack of boots on hard ground, her dread deepened. A guard strode toward the pen, swinging a length of rope in his hand. On your feet, he barked, rattling the gate. The boy beside her flinched, but she froze, her legs too heavy to obey. The man's eyes narrowed. Don't make me drag you. With trembling effort, she pushed herself upright. Her knees wobbled, her throat dry as dust. All around her, the others rose too, silent as ghosts. The men spoke of the auction like it was nothing more than a game. We'll start with a pretty one, a trader muttered, nodding toward her. She draw the biggest coin, the rest can follow. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She glanced toward the horizon, where the sun threatened to break free, bathing the world in fire. That was the hour of her selling. That was the end of her life as she knew it. Her mind raced. There had to be something she could do, some plea, some act of desperation to keep from being sold into darkness. I'll beg. I'll promise them anything, she thought frantically. Cook, sew, clean. I'll do whatever it takes to survive. The guard shoved the gate open with a creak, motioning for her to step forward. The others stared at the ground, unwilling. To meet her eyes, her pulse thundered. This was it. The moment she had dreaded all night had come, and the sun was almost over the horizon. The first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty square. She was led forward, chains clinking softly with every step. Her legs felt like lead, her chest tight as the murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Men jostled and laughed, pointing at her as though she were nothing more than livestock. A rough platform had been set up in the center of the square. Wooden posts supported the simple structure, but the fear it represented towered over her like a fortress. She was forced to stand atop it, the chains biting into her wrists. The auctioneer, a stout man with a cruel grin, called out her supposed value, each word striking like a hammer. Who'll start the bidding? He shouted. The crowd responded with low murmurs and whistles. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her mind raced. She had to do something. If I speak, maybe someone will see I'm more than this. Summoning every ounce of courage, she lifted her voice, trembling but clear. Please don't sell me. I can cook, sew, clean. I'll do anything you need. Just don't take me. The crowd went silent for a moment, stunned by her desperate plea. Some of the men laughed cruelly. Others exchanged curious glances. She looked down at her hands, trembling in the morning light, chains still biting into her skin. Her heart pounded like a drum. At that moment, a shadow fell over the platform. A tall, broad-shouldered man had stepped forward from the crowd. His eyes were fixed on her, expression unreadable but intent. Every instinct told her he was different, someone who could change everything. The auctioneer barked again, but his voice seemed distant, drowned out by the pounding in her chest. She dared to hope that someone might truly hear her cry, and that hope felt like a lifeline in the pale dawn. The tall man's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a blade. She's not for sale. The auctioneer blinked in surprise mid-call. And who are you to say that? He barked, indignation in his tone. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing confrontation. I'll pay the full price, the man said steadily. Stepping closer, his gaze locked on hers, calm yet intense, and for the first time that morning, she felt seen not as property, not as a prize, but as a person. The auctioneer scowled, but the crowd's whispers grew louder. Men nudged each other, murmuring, "He means it. He actually means it." The woman's heart thumped wildly. Chains still bit into her wrists, but hope surged where fear had dominated. She clutched at the rough rope, feeling tears prick her eyes. Could this really be happening? Could someone truly care enough to stop this nightmare? With a swift motion, the man threw down a heavy pouch, coins clinking loudly against the wooden platform. Take her, he said firmly, and don't touch her again. A hush fell. The traders exchanged glances, grudgingly acknowledging the payment. One of them stepped forward to unlock the chains, his movements slow and deliberate as though to remind her she had been theirs. But the man's presence was commanding, protective. He placed a steady hand on her arm as the chains fell away. She stumbled slightly, overwhelmed by the sudden release, then found herself leaning into him instinctively. The fear of the last night and the horrors of the auction began to lift, replaced by a fragile new sense of safety. Are you hurt? He asked quietly, his voice low but steady. No, I don't think so, she whispered, still catching her breath. But inside, she knew she was already changed, rescued, saved, and perhaps given a chance at a life she had dared only to dream about. The dust of the auction square still clung to her dress as the rancher lifted her gently onto his horse. For a moment, she hesitated, gripping the reins as though holding onto a fragile lifeline. The weight of everything she had endured pressed down on her chest, yet beneath it stirred a spark of disbelief and hope. He mounted beside her, calm and unhurried, and together they rode away from the crowd, leaving behind the shouting, the jeering, and the chains that had once held her. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden under the rising sun, whispering freedom in its vast openness. She tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. The horse's rhythm beneath her legs was steady, grounding her in the present while the past threatened to swallow her memory. Every mile carried her farther from captivity, farther from terror, and yet closer to the unknown, a life she had never imagined, and a man whose quiet strength unsettled her. He glanced at her once, his eyes unreadable but watchful. You'll be safe now, he said simply. There was no boast, no declaration of ownership, just a steady promise. For the first time in what felt like forever, she believed it. Tears pricked at her eyes, unbidden, as she let go of the tension in her shoulders. The fear that had tightened her chest began to loosen, replaced by a fragile sense of relief. She dared a small, tentative smile, unsure whether it was hope or gratitude, or perhaps the first stirrings of trust. The wind carried the scent of wild grass and distant pine, and she realized the horizon was no longer a threat. It was an invitation. An unknown path stretched out ahead, and for the first time, she felt she might be ready to take it. The rancher guided the horse steadily, silent, protective, as the prairie rolled beneath them, an endless landscape of freedom and possibility. Ranch appeared at the edge of the horizon, a cluster of buildings surrounded by rolling pastures and grazing horses. The sight stirred something she hadn't felt in weeks, something close to hope. The rancher guided the horse along a dirt path, his movements steady, and she tried to imagine what life could be like beyond fear and chains. When they arrived, he led her into a modest house, the wooden floor worn but clean. Sunlight spilled through the windows, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the air. A small room awaited her, a simple bed, a wooden chair, and a window that opened onto the sprawling prairie. It was nothing luxurious, yet it radiated safety, warmth, and the possibility of beginning again. She sank onto the bed, exhaustion overtaking her. Her muscles ached, her mind was heavy, and yet the most astonishing part of all was that she was finally free. No ropes, no jeering crowd, no fear pressing down on her chest like a lead weight. The rancher set down a small bag of provisions and glanced at her, his expression careful, respectful. "You'll want for nothing while you're here," he said quietly. There was no command in his voice, only assurance. She nodded, unsure what to say, her lips dry. "I thank you," she whispered. It felt inadequate, a word too small for everything he had done. For the first time, she let herself breathe fully, sinking into the feeling that this place, these fields, these buildings, this quiet man who had rescued her might just be where she belonged out as evening fell over the prairie. The sky painted in deep shades of orange and purple. She realized she could close her eyes without fear. For the first time in her life, she was safe. And in that safety, a fragile thread of hope began to weave through her heart. Night had fallen over the ranch, and the prairie lay quiet under a sky strewn with stars. Inside the modest house, the woman sat by the window, her fingers tracing the wooden sill. The events of the day, the auction, the chains, the desperate plea felt almost unreal now. Yet the lingering echo of fear reminded her that trust would not come easily. The rancher moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing a small meal. He did not force conversation, did not ask for gratitude. His silence was a careful reassurance, a space that let her breathe without pressure. She watched him, noting the roughness of his hands, the ease with which he moved through his home, and something stirred in her chest curiosity, and maybe the first flicker of admiration. Finally, unable to bear the quiet, she spoke. Why did you help me?" Her voice was small, almost timid, yet honest. He paused, setting a kettle on the stove. "Because no one should be treated that way," he said simply. "And because you needed someone to stand up for you." There was no hidden meaning, no expectation, just truth. She nodded, unsure if she believed it yet. Fear still clawed at the edges of her mind, whispering that freedom was temporary, that chains could return in a heartbeat. But she stayed, listening to the gentle crackle of the fire, the quiet rhythm of his presence, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that hours passed. And as she finally lay in the small bed he had prepared for her, she realized something remarkable. She could sleep without terror. She was no longer a possession to be sold at dawn. She was herself. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, a fragile trust had begun to grow between her, the rancher, and the life that might finally be hers. The morning light spilled through the small window of her room, gentle and warm. For the first time in what felt like forever, she woke without the weight of terror pressing down on her chest. She stretched, feeling the ache in her muscles from the long ride the day before, and glanced around the modest room. Everything was simple, functional, and, most importantly, safe. Downstairs, she could hear the soft clatter of dishes and the low murmur of the rancher moving about. The sound was comforting, a rhythm of normal life, of people who belonged to each other, not to fear. Gathering her courage, she descended the wooden stairs, careful to move quietly so as not to intrude. He looked up as she entered the kitchen, his eyes meeting hers with calm, quiet attention. "Breakfast is almost ready," he said simply. "Sit. Eat, you've earned it." She hesitated for a moment, unsure how to navigate this new world where she wasn't just surviving, but living. Then she settled at the table, noticing how natural it felt to be treated as a person, not property. As she ate, she watched him move about the kitchen, the small gestures of care, the way he set a plate of eggs in front of her, the quiet attention he paid to her comfort. Her heart, long guarded and battered, began to soften. Later, he led her out into the ranch, showing her the fields, the livestock, the wide open spaces where she could finally breathe freely. She felt the sun on her face, the wind in her hair, and realized the horizon no longer threatened her. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of belonging. The chains of the past were gone, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. This was the start of a new life, one she could finally call her own. Days passed on the ranch, and she began to adjust to the rhythm of a life free from fear. The mornings were filled with chores, feeding chickens, tending to the garden, sweeping the floors, but unlike the forced labor of the past, these tasks were chosen. She discovered the satisfaction of contributing to her own safety and the ranch's upkeep, each small accomplishment restoring pieces of her fractured spirit. The rancher watched quietly from time to time, offering guidance without pressure. When she fumbled while milking a cow or dropped a basket of eggs, he simply shook his head with a small, patient smile. His calm presence became a silent reassurance that no mistake would result in punishment. One afternoon, as she mended a torn shirt by the fire, she glanced up at him. I don't know how to thank you, she admitted, her voice soft. He met her eyes steadily. You don't owe me thanks, he said. You've done nothing wrong. You survived. That's enough. The words, simple and free of expectation, were unlike anything she had heard in her life. Gratitude, once mixed with fear and obligation, now felt lighter, pure. Slowly, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. She began to realize that trust wasn't about giving someone power over her. It was about allowing herself to believe in kindness again. And for the first time, she sensed that she might actually belong somewhere, with someone who would protect her without demanding ownership, without chains or auctions. As the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the prairie gold, she felt a fragile hope bloom within her. Freedom was more than absence of captivity. It was the ability to trust, to rest, and to begin rebuilding a life of her own choosing. One evening, as the prairie glowed in the fading light, she and the rancher sat on the porch, listening to the wind rustle through the tall grass. For the first time, the silence between them felt safe, no fear, no threat. Just two people sharing a quiet moment. She fidgeted with her hands, twisting the hem of her dress nervously. I never told anyone everything that happened, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The rancher's eyes met hers, steady and patient, silently encouraging her to continue. I was taken from my village, she began, each word heavy with memory. When the traders came, they burned homes, stole what they wanted, and they took me. I was just a girl. Her throat tightened, and she paused, blinking back tears. I thought I'd never see freedom again. I thought I'd be sold like an object. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable but gentle. You survived, he said quietly, and you're here now. That matters more than the past. Her lips trembled, but she allowed herself to breathe, realizing that for the first time in years, someone listened without judgment, without expectation. She could speak her pain aloud and not be dismissed. I didn't even think anyone could care, she admitted softly. Not anyone who mattered, but you saved me. The rancher's gaze softened. I didn't save you because you were anyone's property. I saved you because you deserve life, and I'll keep you safe as long as I can. For the first time, she felt a weight lift, not the chains from her wrists, but the invisible chains of fear, isolation, and silence. Sitting there, watching the prairie glow in twilight, she understood that trust could grow even from the deepest wounds, and that perhaps, just perhaps, she could start to heal. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the ranch, spilling golden light across the rolling fields. She followed the rancher as he led her through the pastures, showing her how to feed the horses and check the fences. The rhythm of the work, steady and purposeful, soothed her restless thoughts. Each task completed became a small victory, a reminder that she was more than what the traders had tried to make her. He watched her carefully, correcting her gently when she fumbled with the reins or misjudged the weight of a bale of hay. There was no scolding, only instruction, patient and firm. Slowly, she began to trust his guidance, realizing that he wasn't trying to control her. He was helping her stand on her own dot by midday. Sweat on her brow and dirt on her hands, she laughed. For the first time in weeks, the sound startled her at first, unfamiliar and freeing. But he chuckled quietly beside her, a deep, warm sound that made her heart beat faster. "You're learning quickly," he said, his voice low. Almost teasing. "I have to," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I can't be useless here." "You're not useless," he said firmly. "You're capable, and capable people belong somewhere, not in the hands of those who would sell them." As the day wore on, the sun climbed high, and the prairie stretched endlessly around them. She realized that this land, wild and untamed, mirrored her own journey rough, challenging but full of possibility. With every task, every shared laugh, every glance from the rancher, the bond between them grew. A quiet understanding forming that this was more than mere survival. It was the beginning of a new life together, dot as Ares. The days passed. She began to notice a shadow that lingered behind the rancher's calm exterior. Late at night, when the chores were done and the prairie lay silent under a canopy of stars, he would sit alone by the fire, his gaze distant, jaw tight. Sometimes she would catch him flinch at a distant noise, the snap of a branch, the call of a coyote, and she realized that his past, like hers, was marked by pain. One evening, curiosity overcame her hesitation. She approached quietly, carrying a cup of water. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, standing just beyond the reach of the firelight. He looked at her, the faintest shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. "I will be," he said quietly, his voice steady but low. "Some memories, they don't leave easily." She nodded, understanding more than words could express. Her own memories haunted her every waking moment. She knew that pain could linger like an invisible wound. She hesitated, then dared to sit beside him. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said softly. For a moment he said nothing, and she feared she had overstepped. Then he let out a low sigh, shoulders slumping slightly. "It's not your burden to bear," he admitted, "but I won't hide it from you either. I've lost people I cared for, and sometimes I feel that any bond I let grow will end the same way." She reached out, laying her hand gently over his. Maybe this time it will be different," she whispered. "We both survived. Maybe this time it can be better." For the first time, the storm in his eyes softened. Though the past still lingered, he allowed himself a fragile moment of trust. And she felt their connection deepen, not just as rescuer and rescued, but as two people beginning to heal together. The quiet of the ranch was shattered one afternoon by distant hoofbeats and shouting. She looked up from tending the chickens, heart pounding, as a cloud of dust rose over the horizon. Her stomach twisted. She recognized the men immediately, the traders who had once held her captive, the same faces that had haunted her nightmares. Rancher appeared beside her, calm yet alert, eyes narrowing as he scanned the approaching figures. "Stay inside," he instructed firmly, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Do not come out until I tell you it's safe." She obeyed, retreating into the house, watching through the window as the riders closed in. Their horses were fast, their intent clear. She shivered, gripping the edge of the sill, memories of chains and cruel laughter flooding her mind. The rancher moved with precise efficiency, barking orders to secure the gates and prepare for defense. He was a man accustomed to hard choices, and she saw in his eyes the determination to protect not just her, But the life they had begun to build together, the traders dismounted, striding toward the house with the arrogance of men who thought fear could bend anyone. But the rancher stood at the porch, his stance unyielding, rifle in hand, ready to defend what was his. Her pulse raced, but amidst the terror, a small spark of confidence rose within her. She had survived once. She could survive again, and this time she would not be alone. The shadow of danger loomed over the ranch, testing their growing trust and courage. In the face of real threat, the bond they had begun to form would be forged stronger, or it would be broken forever. The traders reached the edge of the yard, their boots crunching against the dry earth. The woman held her breath, pressing herself against the wall, while the rancher stepped forward, rifle steady, eyes sharp and unwavering. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes time feel like it's stretching endlessly. Hand her over. One of the men sneered, his voice carrying over the silence. You know what she's worth. The rancher didn't flinch. She's not for sale. Leave now, or you'll regret it. A snarl of anger rose from the traders as they reached for weapons, but the rancher was faster. Shots rang out, cracking through the morning air. Dust and debris scattered, and the woman instinctively ducked behind the wooden fence, heart hammering in her chest. Despite her fear, she refused to stay idle. Seeing the rancher fight, she ran to help, grabbing a bucket of water and dousing the flames that had caught on the corral's fence. Her hands were shaking, but determination gave her strength. This was her home now, and she would not let it be taken. The battle was chaotic, dust swirling, horses neighing in panic, but the rancher's experience and resolve were unmatched. One by one, the traders fell back, realizing they had underestimated the man and the bond between him and the woman he protected. When the last of the intruders fled, silence returned. The ranch was scarred, a few fences damaged, but standing. The woman sank to her knees, chest heaving, and the rancher came to her side, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. You're safe, he said quietly, and for the first time, she truly believed it. They had survived together, and nothing could take this newfound life from them. The ranch was quiet again, but the echoes of the morning's chaos lingered. Fences lay splintered, the corral scorched in places, and the horses were still skittish from the commotion. She walked among the damage, assessing the small losses, each one a reminder of how close danger had come. The rancher moved with calm efficiency, tending to the wounded fence posts and calming the frightened animals. She watched him, admiration and gratitude filling her chest. His strength wasn't just physical, it was the quiet courage that held the storm at bay, that kept them both alive. You need to rest, he said softly, noticing her trembling hands. You did more than I expected today. She shook her head. I couldn't just stand there. This is my home too. Her voice wavered, but it carried a newfound confidence. He studied her for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, he allowed himself to sit beside her on the porch. The silence between them was gentle, comforting. She realized that the bond they shared had deepened in the crucible of danger. They had protected each other, and in doing so, had come to rely on one another in ways words could not capture. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the prairie. They sat together in quiet companionship. She felt the tension that had gripped her for months slowly release. Fear still lingered, yes, but it was muted by the presence of someone she could trust, someone who had proven his commitment through action rather than words. That evening, as the wind whispered through the tall grasses, she understood something remarkable. She wasn't just alive. She was building a life with safety, hope, and someone by her side who had become more than a protector. He was becoming family. The night had settled over the ranch, and the prairie was bathed in silver light from the rising moon. Inside the small house, the fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a warm cup, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her chest. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was comforting, a space in which words could finally be weighed and chosen carefully. Finally, she broke the quiet. I don't want to leave, she admitted, voice trembling but honest. I know I shouldn't presume, but I don't want to go back to the world I came from. Not anymore. His gaze softened, and he leaned back in his chair, studying her with a depth of attention she had never encountered. You don't have to leave, he said quietly. You've never had to hear you're safe and you're wanted. Her heart skipped a beat. Wanted? She echoed, the word foreign and exhilarating. I've never been wanted before. Not like this. He nodded, a small, almost shy smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You are. And not because of what you can do or what you've survived, just because you are you. Tears pricked at her eyes as relief and emotion surged. She had been broken, battered, and afraid, yet in this room, by this fire, she felt seen in a way that went beyond protection or survival. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope not just for safety, but for love, for belonging. And as their eyes met in the firelight, she realized that perhaps this life, this quiet, steady, shared life, was exactly what she had been praying for all along. The days following the attack were filled with work, but this time it was different, purposeful, healing work. Together, they repaired fences, tended to the animals, and restored the small corners of the ranch that had been damaged. Every nail driven, every patch of fence rebuilt was a reminder that their lives were no longer defined by fear or captivity. She moved alongside him, sharing the labor equally, her hands roughened by honest work. He watched her with quiet admiration, occasionally offering guidance but never overbearing. Slowly, the rhythm of their shared life built a connection stronger than words alone could express. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, they paused on the porch, leaning side by side against the wooden railing. The warmth of the day lingered, mingling with the soft hush of the wind through the grass. She glanced at him, her heart full, and realized that her once shattered spirit had begun to mend, not just through safety, but through shared trust, care, and respect. You've changed everything, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle rustle of the prairie. He turned to her, a softness in his gaze that matched her own. No, he said quietly, we've changed it. Together, this is ours now, our life, our home. For the first time, she felt the weight of the past lift completely. The darkness that had once loomed over her existence was replaced by light, by the steady certainty that she belonged, not just to a home, but to a life filled with hope, partnership, and the possibility of love. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, and she realized that every sunrise would now mark a life rebuilt, a future chosen, and a beginning shared with someone who had become far more than a protector. The prairie stretched endlessly under a brilliant sunrise, golden light spilling across the rolling fields. She stood at the edge of the corral, feeling the wind lift. Her hair, her heart light for the first time in years. Beside her, the rancher approached, his steps steady, his presence a quiet promise she had come to rely on. They paused, looking out over the land together, sharing the silence that had grown, comfortable and deep. She felt a surge of gratitude and love she could no longer contain. Turning toward him, she spoke softly, I want to stay here with you forever. He met her gaze, eyes warm and steady, a small smile tugging at his lips. And you shall, he replied. This is your home, your life. Here you are safe, wanted, and loved. Tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of relief, joy, and fulfillment. She had survived the darkness of captivity, the terror of being sold, and the uncertainty of the unknown. And now, at last, she had found a life defined by choice, care, and mutual respect. He took her hand gently, intertwining their fingers, and for a moment neither spoke. The world around them, the vast prairie, the steady animals, the warmth of the rising sun seemed to pause in acknowledgement of their bond. "This is the start of everything we've been waiting for," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of promised aught. She nodded, heart swelling. The chains of her past had been replaced by the freedom of love, trust, and belonging. Together, they turned to the ranch, ready to face whatever life would bring, knowing that as long as they stood side by side, they could overcome anything. For the first time, she felt truly home, not just on the land, but in the arms of someone who had become her forever.